bright.
It's too bright.
Yeah, bright and hot. It's like being on stage.
Should we turn on top?
Huh?
Should we turn it off?
No, it's okay, but
But we can turn this off and that small one we can turn on. The small one.
No, I guess leave them on. That's what they're going to use. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karma Vahe Tejasvinavati Tamastu Ma Vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us, may He sustain us. May we grow in strength together. May our study together be fruitful. And may we not hate one another. Oh, peace, peace, peace. Okay, so we're studying Kathopanishad, and we'll read the verses we've covered already. So Vajasravasa, also called Audalaka, in the line of the ancient sage Vajasravaha, famous for his charity, performed a sacrifice known as Vishvajit in the hope of getting adequate rewards in heaven. The rule of this sacrifice was that he would give away in charity everything he possessed. Vajasravasa had a young son named Nachiketa. Nachiketa watched the kind of gifts his father was distributing. He was young, but he had faith in the scriptures. He pondered in the light of that faith. There are old cows, too feeble to eat, drink, give any milk, or breed. He who gives such cows as gifts to others goes to a cheerless world after death. That world is known as Ananda, cheerless. So Nachiketa asked his father, "To whom will you give me?" He asked twice, even thrice, because his father did not reply. Finally, his father said, "I will give you to death. I am surely among the foremost of Father's children and disciples. If I am not among the foremost, I am at least among the second best. I am by no means among the worst. What sacrifice will Father render to Yama by sending me to him?" He says, "Consider your ancestors, the great souls of the past, lived their lives. Consider also the lives of the great ones living now. Corn grows and dies. It is the same with human beings. But when a Brahmin comes to a house as a guest, he is to be treated as fire. To please him, offer him the prescribed things. So Vaivasvata, fetch him water. If a Brahmin goes without food in someone's house, that man, a fool, will see all his hopes and expectations dashed to the ground. Merits of good company, good speech, performing sacrifices, providing wells and other sources of water for the benefit of others, as well as his cattle and children, all these are destroyed." Addressing Nachiketa, Yama said, "O Brahman, you are my guest, and you are also a Brahman. I owe you much respect. I salute you. Please bless me that I may prosper. Brahman, you spent 3 days in my house without eating anything. Please ask 3 boons from me, one for each of the 3 nights you stayed in my house." Nachiketa said in reply, "O death, please grant that my father, Gautama, may be free from worry, that he may be in a happy mood, that he may no longer be angry with me, and that when I return from your place, he may readily recognize me and greet me as before. Of the 3 boons, this is the first I ask for." Yama replied, "Your father, Adalaki, son of Aruna, was affectionate to you before. You are now going back home at my instance, and he will be equally affectionate and cordial to you. Till you return, he will have good sleep at night. He will not be displeased when he sees you back home, released from death's clutches. Nachiketa said, there is nothing to be afraid of in heaven. You, O death, have no influence there. And thus there is no fear of old age. Hunger and thirst also do not trouble a person. Free from sorrow and mental anguish, he enjoys life in heaven. O death, you know the fire sacrifice, which is the way to heaven. Please explain it to me. I have faith. Those who are in heaven enjoy immortality. This knowledge of the fire sacrifice is what I ask for as my second boon from you. Yama said, O Nachiketa, I know well the fire sacrifice that leads to heaven. I will explain it to you in detail. Please listen carefully and try to understand it. Please remember, this fire is the means of attaining immortality, and it is also the support of the universe. It lies hidden in the minds of the wise. Yama told Nachiketa that fire was the first world. In other words, the first embodied existence. He then described how the fire sacrifice was to be performed. He told him such details as how the sacrificial altar had to be built, what kind of bricks were to be used, and how they were to be arranged. He also told him how the fire was to be lighted. Nachiketa correctly repeated each word Yama had spoken. This pleased Yama, and he then said, that great soul Yama, highly delighted, said to Nachiketa, there is another boon I want to give to you. This fire sacrifice will henceforth be known by your name. Take also this multi-shaped necklace. So this is what we covered so far. So Nachiketa went to the abode of Yama. Yama wasn't home, and so for 3 days he stayed by his door without any food. So when Yama came back, he said he apologized and offered him 3 boons. The first boon was that Nachiketa's father would have peace of mind, and that when Nachiketa returned, his father would accept him back, with love and affection like before. And so Yama said, yes, this will be done. Then the second boon that Nachiketa asked was to learn the secret of the fire sacrifice, which, when properly performed, would lead a person to immortality in heaven, relative immortality. So Yama has instructed him on how to perform the sacrifice. Now we come then to verse 17. Trinam chiketas tridhir retyas sandhim tri karma krit tarati janma mrityur ramagyanam deva vidyam viditva nichayemam shanti madhyan amiti. So he who, properly instructed by his mother, father, and teacher, performs thrice the sacrifice named after Nachiketa, and also practices the 3 things. In other words, performing sacrifices, giving in charity, and studying the Vedas, he goes beyond birth and death. So then Swami Lokeshwarananda's commentary, which is based also on Shankar's commentary, says that the person who performs the fire sacrifice, he first learns about Virat from the scriptures. Virat, who issues from Hiranyagarbha, who is all-knowing, radiant, and venerable. He next realizes that he is one with Virat, and he attains infinite peace. This is not liberation, however. This is a long way towards liberation, as only self-knowledge can give that. Nothing short of self-knowledge can give liberation. Yet, if you can feel you're one with Virat, you are close to liberation. You can feel sure that you are progressing towards it. So Virat is the universe. It's the gross physical universe which issues from Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic mind. And one who performs the Nachiketa sacrifice, the fire worship correctly, he becomes one with Virat, one with the universal consciousness of being one with the whole universe. And that is kind of a great step towards knowing your real self, which is the ultimate consciousness, the ultimate reality in everything. Now, normally most of us live in a state of consciousness primarily centered on our body and our mind, on our personal human identity, and our consciousness is identified. Okay, I'm this person here, the experiences this person has, the feelings, the reactions, the desires and so forth this person has. This is my world, my consciousness. Now, as we mentioned before, that if a person is completely uneducated, he lives in a very small consciousness. Mostly he's just what happens to me. That's all I know. That's my whole world. Now, through education, a person expands his mind. He expands his consciousness. So even though he's living as an individual, he's much more aware of what's going on in the rest of the world, of history, of science, of knowledge, of all these things. So his world, his consciousness is much bigger than the ordinary person's. Now, in performing the fire worship with the proper meditation, and it's, a person is actually able to go beyond his individual consciousness and become identified with Virat, become one, become identified with the whole universe, so that he's not his consciousness, which is his world, is his reality, that isn't focused on just this one particular person. It's now focused on everything. And so it's a very high state in comparison to ordinary life. And relatively speaking, the person achieves immortality. He achieves a very kind of high state of existence. So this is the kind of meaning here, but that is still not the same as self-knowledge, which is oneness in consciousness with Brahman itself, which is infinite, which is something vastly beyond even this whole universe, is something vastly beyond that. Now, each person has the capacity to live in a very, very small, tiny world, or to live in a huge, vast world. Like I said, through education, a person begins to grow in his consciousness, and his consciousness becomes bigger. Swami Vivekananda has said, that selfishness is contraction, and contraction is death. Unselfishness is expansion, and expansion is life. In other words, the more selfish a person is, the more self-centered, the more focused he is on me, on my particular personal identity, the smaller his world becomes. And so everything is in terms of what I'm getting, what's happening with me. But as a person becomes unselfish, or as he begins to lift consciousness from his personal limited identity and begin to open it up to other people and to other knowledge and other experiences, then his consciousness begins to grow, and it can ultimately become as vast as the whole universe. Because consciousness itself is completely unlimited, completely infinite. So, in other words, we can make our world as small as we want, or we can make it as big as we want. And Joe Goldsmith, one kind of modern mystic, he said how, imagine the chicken in the egg, the little chicken, when it's in the egg, all it knows is darkness. All it knows is the egg. It doesn't know anything else, doesn't have any awareness of anything else. But then at one point it begins to peck on the egg, and eventually it breaks it open and gets out of the egg, and then he says, oh, this whole vast barnyard is here, this whole vast thing that I wasn't aware of before. He said, in the same way most human beings, we live entirely in the very small world of our own body and mind and personal self, and we think this is all there is. We don't know anything else. We're only aware of what's happening in my personal life. But in spiritual practices and things, the person started pecking on his shell, started trying to grow beyond that, try to reach something beyond that, and eventually he can reach levels of consciousness where his vision, his awareness expands tremendously, and he discovers, oh, this whole universe is here. I mentioned before how normally you have this whole vast universe, even the physical universe, full of galaxies and stars and countless living beings. But yet for most people, all their attention is focused on what's happening to me, what's happening in my personal life. And you're hardly aware of all this other vast, other 6 billion people in the world and all this whole vast universe. It hardly enters your thought. But you have the capacity that your consciousness is ultimately behind your thought. Because the consciousness, which is your real self, which is what you're trying to see, that is, it contains everything. It contains all beings, all universes, everything. And how big or how small you become, it depends on what you want. The fact is that most people don't want God consciousness. They'll fight it. They're used to their small, dark, kind of little room, and if when the light comes in, they react to it. And our ego, our limited self, it reacts. When kind of light comes, it will tend to fight it. And so this is a struggle that goes on until, through self-surrender, through a change in focus from personal self to God, then slowly it begins to open up. So the principle behind the fire sacrifice, what makes it effective, is the meditation that goes with it, which ultimately identifies with Virat, with the whole universe. And in one place with Swami Vivekananda, when he started his Ramakrishna mission and the idea of service of mankind, he emphasized the worship of Virat. He said, at this time in history, it's necessary that man learn to worship Virat. In other words, learn to think of yourself not as a personal small individual, but as one with all individuals. Only as people begin to think in those terms will the earth and the global community will we be able to live in harmony. So then the commentary goes on. It says that Shankara is totally opposed to the idea of combining worship with knowledge. Combining these two means combining two opposites, dualism and non-dualism. But Shankara concedes that there is such a thing as gradual liberation, krama mukti. This verse is a typical example of his attitude towards gradual liberation. He does not condemn it. Perhaps the reason for his attitude is that the disciplines involved for liberation proper and gradual liberation are almost the same: study, guidance, and meditation. Only in the case of gradual liberation you add worship. But the path to liberation proper does not need it. If there is meditation, it slowly replaces worship. So real worship is meditation. Worship without meditation serves no purpose. So even in worship itself, you have 3 basic levels of worship. First, you have the physical rituals, the pujas with the utensils and offerings and so forth that you do, and physically. But then as worship deepens, it becomes more inward and it becomes more mental. So that after a certain point, the worship will become upasana. It'll become a meditation, an inner kind of a meditation, consciousness of the deity, and less at the physical level. But then finally, at the highest level of worship, there's this union with God. The worshiper, he just plunges into God and becomes absorbed in God and kind of directly. And so this is eventually the purpose behind all the worship is to lead to union with God, which ultimately becomes the Advaita, the non-dualism. As long as there's dualism, there's two separate things. There's you, the individual, as a worshiper, and there's God, the object of the worship. But as you go on with it, you're gradually getting closer and closer, and the two are gradually becoming united. And until eventually the worshiper, the separate worshiper, disappears altogether, and only the one divine consciousness remains. So this is kind of the goal, is to attain union with God. Our whole problem is that we exist primarily as ego, as the idea that I'm an individual and I'm separate from God. I'm separate from God, I'm separate from other people, I'm separate from the universe. And in the Nachiketa sacrifice, the person actually gets beyond I'm separate from the universe and becomes kind of one with the universe. But beyond that is oneness with the underlying source of the universe. So, however, most people simply are not ready for this non-dual thing. And most people, it's incomprehensible to most people. It's usually something that gradually develops. A person starts off with the idea, okay, I'm here, but I recognize there's some greater power there, and I begin to pray to it and worship it and get close to it, and gradually I begin to get some experience of it. And it's only as that experience, that actual communion begins to happen, that then the person gradually will understand what Advaita is, or what he'll gradually want to be closer to God until he becomes completely united. So we come now to the next verse, 18. Trina chikesh tvaya meta dviditva ya evam vidvam shnupte nachiketa sa vidyur pasan purata pranodya shokat digo modate svargaloke. So he who knows, as is stated earlier, the details of the fire sacrifice, such as the kind of bricks to be used in building the sacrificial altar, their number, and how the fire is to be installed, and who performs the Nachiketa sacrifice thrice, always meditating that he is one with Virat. Such a person throws off, even before his death, all bonds of ignorance and other human weaknesses. Going beyond all mental suffering, he enjoys himself in heaven, being conscious all the time that he is one with Virat. So the Nachiketa sacrifice derives this importance from the fact that it leads to the realization of one's identity with Virat. The sacrifice by itself is not that important. It is the meditation preceding this realization that is important. So the next verse. Eshatygnir Nachiketa Svargyo Yama Dvitiyena Varena Eta Magni Tavaiva Pravakshanti Gyanasa Stritiyam Varam Nachiketo Vinishwa. O Nachiketa, as your second boon, you asked for knowledge about Agni. I have just given you that boon. People will call that Agni by your name. Now ask for your third boon. So the word Agni sometimes means Virat, and sometimes the sacrifice that leads to union with Virat. The former is the end, and the latter is the means. Eyam prete vici kitsa manushyetsti yeke nayam mastiti chaike etad vidya manushishtastvaya Varanamesha Varastritiya. So Nachiketa said, when death occurs, there's always the debate on whether anything, in other words, the soul continues. Some say it does, and others say it does not. So I beg to be enlightened by you, so that I may know the answer. Of the boons, this is the third I ask for. So Nachiketa had asked for the two boons. First, that his father would have peace of mind and would not be angry with him when he returned. Second, that he wanted to know how to perform the fire sacrifice which leads to heaven, to immortality. And now he's come to the essential third boon, which is the kind of crux of the Upanishad. And he raises the question that when death occurs, there is a debate. Some people say the soul continues, and some say it doesn't. And he says, I want to know the answer. In other words, I want to know, what am I really? What is my real self? And this is a very important question. I think last week we talked about how when Swami Vivekananda was here, back in 1893, practically one of the most popular spiritual movements of his day was called spiritualism. And this is in America. And the idea of spiritualism, this is where people hold seances and they try to contact their dead relatives, their father, their grandmother, and things like that, people who have gone on beyond. And it was a very significant thing in America, because America, in India, they've had this kind of knowledge from time immemorial. It's throughout the culture. But in America, that wasn't there. There was many very religious people, very devoted people who had great faith and did their best to do the will of God, but there was nobody who actually knew what happened after death. That they went to church every Sunday. They all believed in heaven. Yes, when you die, you go to heaven. But nobody could actually say, what happens after you leave, because nobody had any experience. And this is called, piercing the veil. And so in America, there's the spiritualism, this idea of trying to contact somebody who's gone beyond the veil, somebody who's gone to the other side. If you can actually contact them, then at least you have some evidence, some proof, there is something there. And as Swami Varadananda said, that even the person who's seen a ghost is better than a theologian, because at least he knows something's there. He's had some experience. And so Americans, they were trying to get some kind of experience, because otherwise it was just, nobody knew. Everybody, preachers, told them, well, this is the way it is, and this is that. But actually, no, there was nobody. And this is, I think I talked about all this in the class of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. There's nobody who could say, yes, I've seen God. And even when they managed to contact, in some cases, these various people who have passed on, basically they found that they didn't know much more than we do. They were like one step beyond, one step, they were a little more aware of the presence of God, of the reality of spirit and so on, but not much. Mostly, they were pretty much the same as when they left Earth. And so they weren't able to provide any deep answers. I talked recently. I was in St. Petersburg. We have our new center there, Swami Ishtananda. And this was founded many, many years ago, probably about 50 years ago, by a man named Reverend Panta, he was a disciple of Swami Nikhilananda, but he started having spontaneous experiences of seeing ghosts, or seeing these people who had passed on. And so he got involved in the Spiritual Frontiers Church. And that Spiritual Frontiers Church is, I don't know how big it is now, but that's kind of their thing, is doing seances, trying to contact, the dead and so forth. And so he was just kind of naturally a medium, the town was just there. And so he began to do this, practice this thing for, these seances and things for some time, and he was genuine, wasn't a fake. But after about 20 years or so, he gave it up. Because he realized that just because a person is dead, it doesn't mean he knows anything. He just all the messages and things that came through, it was just like, ordinary homilies, be good, to do this, do that, and he realized that it was just kind of a waste of time. And he realized that Vedanta is where you have to go. You have to go higher than that. So there are many levels. After you kind of leave this plane of consciousness, there are many different levels there. And like I said, some of them are not much different than what the person was here. It's only when people go deeper. But that idea that you can actually, somebody can actually say, yes, there's a reality there. Yes, I've seen the land. I've gone beyond the ocean. I've seen what's there. To have that knowledge, evidence, was very significant, important in America because nobody had it. Nobody knew. All they had was the kind of promises and faiths and what they'd been told. So this idea, this question that Nachiketa is asking, he said, when a person leaves this world, what happens to him? Does he still live? Does he still exist? Or what? That's what I want to know. I want to know the truth about it. So the commentary then, and that's his third bullet, and that's the essential bullet. That's the kind of essence of the Upanishad. So what the Upanishad has so long taught us is peripheral. Even being in the position of Virat is not enough. The summum bonum of life is self-knowledge. Nachiketa's question raises a host of issues, all eventually leading to what is crucial in Vedanta, namely, what is self-knowledge? How can it be attained? And what are its benefits? Before Yama answers these questions, however, he tests Nachiketa. He offers him all kinds of pleasurable things. But Nachiketa spurns him. The only thing he wants is self-knowledge. So Yama is impressed and finally bestows on him the knowledge he is seeking. So the path to self-knowledge is sharp like a razor's edge. Only the strongest, the bravest, and the most determined dare tread this path. But whatever the hazards, the reward is more precious than anything this world or the world beyond can offer. It is absolute freedom, it is absolute peace and happiness. So then we come to verse 21. Devara tapi vichikit sitam pura nahi suvigneya manaresha dharma anyam varam nachiketo vinishva ma moparo sirati ma shujaino. So Yama said, O Nachiketa, formerly, even the gods had their doubts about the question you have raised. The nature of the self is a very subtle matter. It is difficult to understand. Ask for some other boon. Don't press me for this one. Release me from it. So for the second boon, Yama had taught Nachiketa about the fire sacrifice. If Nachiketa performed that sacrifice thrice in the right manner, and also with the appropriate meditation, he would be able to attain the status of Virat. Being Virat is good, but not good enough for Nachiketa. After all, it is not a permanent position. It only lasts for some time. But even if it were a permanent position, Nachiketa would not have accepted it. Such a position is also a type of bondage, though it has much power. So Nachiketa wants liberation and nothing short of that. That is why he wants to know about the self. He wants to know if death is the end of everything, and if not, what remains. If there is such a thing as the self, what is it? What is that self like? This is the third boon Nachiketa is asking for. So Yama first wants to test Nachiketa, however. The sine qua non of self-knowledge is renunciation. It is total renunciation, not renunciation of a thing or two. If you're ready to renounce everything, then you may attain self-knowledge. So Yama wants to see if Nachiketa is prepared to renounce that far. Another way Yama tests Nachiketa is by discouraging him. He says that the subject is very difficult even for the gods. The self is not like an object that can be seen, felt, or heard. It is too subtle a thing for sense perception. So Yama tests Nachiketa in many ways, but Nachiketa passes each test very well. This episode of Yama testing Nachiketa is only to show how difficult the subject of the self is and what sort of preparation one has to have in order to understand it. So, in order to attain self-knowledge, as I say, renunciation is necessary. Because what renunciation really means is ultimately letting go of the present state of consciousness you're in so that you can reach a higher state of consciousness. In other words, we talked earlier about the fire sacrifice. That sacrifice, the individual through his meditation, he could attain oneness with the Virat, with the entire universe. But you can't attain that oneness with the universe even if you're holding on to your personal self. And this is most of us. We have our personal self, we have our personal desires and goals and ambitions and all these things, and we're holding on to that. Now, as long as we're doing that, we're the personal self. We're the small individual self, and that's all. But as a person begins, and this, for example, the devotee, as he begins to surrender to God, as he begins to take an attitude, well, not my will, but thy will be done, he's letting go of that tight hold he's got on all his personal preferences and desires and things, and he's letting something else, another state of consciousness, begin to operate. And it's only when that letting go comes of our personal, separate identity, as that letting go comes, then the higher consciousness can begin to come in. So, and this is why what the necessity of renunciation doesn't mean that you hate everybody. It doesn't mean that you reject everybody, you run away and hide from the world, but it just means that you're ultimately, you keep your consciousness centered in God, in the inner presence of God, and then you deal with the world. But as long as you are totally holding on to the external world, depending on the external world, for all your happiness, all your joy, and everything is coming out of what you get there, then you're kind of stuck there. But when you let go of it, begin to let go of it, and then you begin to realize that what you have inside, in your own inner consciousness, is where you find kind of wonderful things. That's where you find all your treasures. And then slowly, your need, your dependency for the external things that you get, from outside, that begins to lessen, and your consciousness then begins to kind of lift up. But it can't lift up as long as you're holding on to it. If I want to go, get out the door there, but I'm holding on to the podium, I just keep going, and nothing will happen. So as Sri Krishna, he gave the parable, about story about the villagers who went into the farmers went into the village, they sold their stuff, and then they celebrated at a tavern. Then later, they'd taken a boat, they crossed the river, got into the village, and now they're ready to go home. And so they were all happy and singing things. They got in the boat and started rowing. And they kept rowing and rowing, and eventually it became light. And they wondered what happened. Why aren't we across the river? And then they realized they hadn't untied the boat for the dock. And so all night they were just rowing, but they hadn't gotten anywhere. So like that, as long as we're holding on to our personal life and our personal desires and ambitions and hopes and all these things, then even though we may be doing puja or doing something else, we're not getting very far because our consciousness is kind of anchored here. So renunciation means letting go of that holding on, that grasping of what you're at, and then you open yourself up. You let. And this is ultimately what you discover, is that you don't force God to come, you don't make God, but you let Him go. You know, there's in the New Age, the expression, let go and let God. You know, when we let go of the idea that, okay, I'm in charge, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make this happen, as we start to let go of that, then there's something else, there's something deeper that begins to function. And we'll find gradually that, one, we're finding peace and happiness, confidence, fearlessness, the presence of something bigger than ourselves inside, and that it can handle our life quite well. That we don't have to keep our focus, attention, always on what am I going to get, what am I going to do, how am I going to solve this problem. You gradually realize that there is a presence within you that when it's allowed to function, everything will unfold just naturally. Whatever you need for your fulfillment, it will come, but without you telling God, I want this right here. You know, you have to back off and let the divine consciousness begin to operate. And ultimately, if you want to reach self-knowledge, then you have to be able to let go of the kind of personal self altogether, and then you can begin to expand into kind of the divine. From the ego standpoint, from the personal standpoint, this feels like loss. This feels like death to the ego. But in fact, it's becoming more what you actually are. Instead of becoming, thinking, oh, I'm this body, I'm this person here, I'm this very limited human being. Instead of that being your identity, as you move towards the real self, you actually become more of what you are, not less. But there's this difficult transition, which is described as the fear of death, which comes. That if I let go of my individual self, I'll be gone. It'll be like a death. But actually, once that transition is made, then you go on this vast consciousness. I'm something much bigger than it was. It was much better, and everything is just going a whole lot better than it was when I was in charge. Okay, now we come to verse 22. Devara trapi vichikiti sitam kila tvam cha vidyo yana sunde mata vakta chasya tvadvignanyo na lapyo nanyo varastulya letasya kascha. So Nachiketa replied, O death, even the gods debated about this in the past. You yourself said this just now. You further said that it was not easy to understand the self. A teacher like you is not easy to find. Moreover, no boon is as precious as this. So Nachiketa tried to discourage, or Yama tried to discourage Nachiketa by saying that the nature of the self was a difficult subject to understand. To give him an idea of how difficult it was, Yama said that even the gods did not know exactly what it was. Yama, of course, was testing Nachiketa. Nachiketa, however, stood his ground. He said that if this were an easy subject, he would not have troubled Yama about it. Furthermore, the subject was something connected with death. Did something called the self survive after death? This is a question not only human beings, but even gods debated about. Yama, the king of death, was surely the most fit person to answer this question. That is why Nachiketa did not agree to Yama's request to ask for another boon. Moreover, Nachiketa knew that what he was asking for was the best and the highest. There was no other boon to compare with self-knowledge. What was remarkable about Nachiketa was his tenacity of purpose. So in verse 23, Shata Yusha Putra Patra Vinishva Bahun Pashun Hasti Hiranya Masha Bhumer Madha Maha Dayatanam Vinishva Swayam Cha Jiva Sharado Yavadichasi. Yama said, choose sons and grandsons, each of them living for 100 years. Ask for many heads of cattle, elephants, horses, and a great quantity of gold. Ask for a vast empire. Live with a healthy body as long as you like. So Yama first tried to discourage Nachiketa by telling him how difficult it was to know the self. This served no purpose. He then tried another method, tempting him with things people crave for. This was his way of testing Nachiketa. This is how a good teacher tests a good disciple. So then verse 24, Itatulyam yadi manyase varam vinishva vitam chirajivikam cha mahabhuma nachiketas tvam edhi kamanam tva kamabhajam karomi. So if you can think of anything else as good as this boon, ask for it. Choose wealth, live a long life, and be an emperor. Ask for anything that gods or men covet. I will see that you enjoy it. So Yama is still testing Nachiketa. He says that he has offered him many good things, but if Nachiketa can think of better things, he will be only too glad to give them. A long life, many sons and grandsons, wealth, the position of an emperor. All these he has already offered. In short, anything that gods or men want to enjoy is Nachiketa's for the asking. Furthermore, Yama guarantees that Nachiketa will be able to enjoy each one of them. So we go to verse 25. Yeke kama durlabha marjaloke sarvam kama shantata prastadayas yama ramaha sartha saturya nahi dvisha lambaniya manushai abhirma patipai paricharayasva Nachiketo Marnam Manu Prakshit. So there are many pleasant things in the world. Some of them are almost unattainable. But if you so wish, you can have them. Take, for instance, young girls seated on chariots and playing musical instruments. They are beyond the reach of ordinary men. But if you want, I will give you such girls and they will be at your service. Don't, however, press me to answer your questions about death. In other words, if death is the end of everything, or if something like the self still continues. So Yama continues to tempt Nachiketa. He offers him things most people would eagerly grab for. They are indeed very alluring and difficult to get. Against these, the answer Nachiketa is seeking is useless. What good will it do, Nachiketa, to know if there's a self or not? It is an idle question. It is like wanting to know if crows have any teeth. Shankara suggests that this is the implication of the manner in which Yama is tempting Nachiketa. So now verse 26. Swabhava machasya yadanta kaitat sarvendriyanam jarayanti teja api sarvam jivita alpaleva talvaiva vahastava vidjite. So Nachiketa said, O death, all these enjoyments are transitory, and they also exhaust the vitality of the one's sense organs. Even what is considered the longest life is short. The vehicles, the dancers, and singers, keep all these for yourself. So now Nachiketa shows his mettle. He promptly and emphatically rejects Yama's offer, and he gives reasons why he rejects it. He says that they're all svobhava. That is, no one knows for certain how long they will last. They may not last till tomorrow. They are all transitory. Nachiketa makes it clear that he is not interested in things that are transitory. If he wants anything at all, it must be permanent. So this is true renunciation and also true discrimination. Renunciation means that one rejects what is transitory. Discrimination means that one is able to decide what is permanent and what is not. Nachiketa excelled in both renunciation and discrimination. He was firm in his resolve to know the true nature of the self, and he would mercilessly sweep away anything that stood in the way. Okay, so Yama has offered various things to Nachiketa, tried to tempt him, to divert him from seeking the answer to that question. And in the same way, as a person's practicing sadhana along the spiritual path, these same kinds of temptations would tend to come, because buried within the mind are the samskaras, the impressions we've had, and the more one advances spiritually, the more one realizes one can attain what one wants. You know, as a human being, with our very physical consciousness, our very limited consciousness, we just don't have the ability, or we feel we don't have the ability or the power to accomplish that much. You know? At least as the older we get, the more we tend to feel like that. But as a person's moving inward in his consciousness, he's moving more towards kind of his own innate power, where all these things, whatever, whether it's wealth or kingship or anything else, also suddenly, at least in the inner level, these things seem suddenly possible, and suddenly kind of very desirable. And so this is in the process, path of yoga, these are all kind of temptations or obstacles that come along. The desire to grab hold of a certain level of experience or a certain thing and say, oh, okay, I want this. This is what I want. And then the person gets distracted from the path. So this is why it's important to have a clear idea of kind of what you're seeking, of kind of what your value, and this is where scriptural study, all these things play an important role, is once you're clear in your head of what it's all about, then you can evaluate, you discriminate, and determine, oh, this is real and this isn't. If a person doesn't really understand he's just doing practices without understanding what it's all about or what he's supposed to be getting, then it's easy to get distracted somewhere along the way and go off into danger. We said earlier, talked about the Raja Yoga, Patanjali's yoga. At some point, the yogi, he tends to come to a fork in the road. One way leads to self-aggrandizement, increasing his self. He realizes, oh, I've got these powers now. I've got these abilities now. I'm so much stronger, more powerful than the ordinary person, and I can begin to get all these things, that money and following and everything else. Or it leads, the other fork leads to self-abnegation, which is basically, let me realize God. Let God do what he wants then. And so unless there's a spirit of kind of self-surrender behind the practice, eventually a person tends to get off, and then he doesn't reach the self. He may get a high level of yogic power or something, but he won't reach the self-knowledge, because he's still holding on to that separate existence. That says, oh, I want this and I want that. So all these temptations that Yama is offering to Nachiketa, in various forms, they'll tend to come in the lives of ordinary aspirants too at some point. This like, oh, and now I can actually get this thing, I can actually have this. what you Chinpai, you said mentally, when you're in kind of mental, you feel, oh yes, I can do this, it's doable. Then you get back down to your human consciousness, try, it's not so easy after all. You know, it's a struggle. But anyway, but this way, you know, you have these guru calls and things like this. Somebody gets a little advanced, and then suddenly he can attract following, money, all these things, and he gets off the path. So Nachiketa, before Yama gives him the knowledge, he tests him, he tempts him with all these things and says, yo, why don't you have this, why don't you have this instead, why bother with that? But Nachiketa is firm that he wants to know the truth, he wants the knowledge. So we'll finish up this first chapter. So verse 27 says, Navitena Tarpanio Manusho Lapsha Mahe Vita Ma Dakshman Chitva Jivishya Mo Yavadeshishya Sitvam Varastu Me Varaniya Saviva. So no one is satisfied with wealth, and since we have seen you, we will no doubt get wealth. We shall also live as long as you rule, Yama. Therefore, that alone is the boon I ask for. I do not want any other boon. So Nachiketa explains further why he rejects Yama's offer. Yama had offered him wealth, but Nachiketa says that a person can never be satisfied with wealth. A rich person is not necessarily a happy person. So Nachiketa has no delusions about material prosperity. He's already said that it is so uncertain, for by its very nature it is transitory. Every sense pleasure is transitory. Nachiketa has no interest in such things. Only that which is permanent interests him. So Nachiketa has another reason why he does not accept Yama's offer of wealth. Since he has seen Yama face to face, he can have wealth or anything else he desires. He knows Yama is pleased with him, and when Yama is pleased, everything is at his disposal. Moreover, as long as Yama is in power, Nachiketa need not fear even death. Yama, it should be noted, was first a mortal. He became a god by virtue of his good work. As a god, he enjoys certain powers, but those powers are only for a stipulated period. That is why Nachiketa says, as long as you rule as Yama. So we mentioned before how the gods in Hindu mythology, they're like bureaucrats in the heavenly bureaucracy. They are human beings who have attained a great deal of merit, a great deal of, and so they're put in a cosmic position. And so they, like Yama, he was at one time he was a mortal, a human being who attained a great height of spiritual development, and so he's got this job, but it's limited. He holds the position for a certain length of time, and then he goes back to being a human being again. So then we go to verse 28. Ajirya ta mamam ritana upetya jirya marchya kvada staha pragyana avidyanam varna rati prabodha nati dirke jivite ko ramate. So who below on this earth, knowing that he is subject to decay and death, and that all sense pleasures, no matter what their source, are bound to end soon, would deliberately choose the long life. And if he has to come, if he has come to know immortal things, immortal beings who are able to give him higher things. So the answer is obvious, no one would. Nachiketa again tells Yama why he does not want the things Yama is offering. Why does he not want them? Because he knows that they're transitory. As a mortal, he has seen both decay and death. He knows he himself will someday die. Similarly, everything he possesses will perish. The very nature of sense pleasures is that they are attractive, but they do not last long. Nachiketa knows this very well, and this is why he does not feel drawn towards them. Yama had offered him the rarest things among sense pleasures, but Nachiketa had no hesitation in refusing them. His distaste for sensuous things has grown stronger since meeting Yama. For so long he had seen and lived among mortals. Now for the first time, he is seen an immortal, a god. Moreover, Yama is capable of giving him higher things than sense pleasures. Would it not be sheer folly on his part to ask for trinkets when it is possible for him to get precious jewels? After meeting an immortal and knowing the difference between what is transitory and what is eternal, Nachiketa has no delusions about a long life on earth. And then we come to the last verse, 29. Yasminidam vichiki santimejo yasam parayai mahati bruhi nasta yoyam varo gurham nu pravishto nanyam tasmana chiketa vinite. O death, people have always debated about whether there is a self or not. The question is very important, for it is linked to the question of liberation or of the other world. It is also difficult and needs much investigation. It is a mystery. Please explain it to me. Nachiketa wants no other boon. So Nachiketa once again tells Yama that why he is insisting on having the boon he has chosen. He had earlier told Yama, clearly and firmly, that he is not interested in sense pleasures or anything transitory. He only wants to know the mystery surrounding the real identity of man. Is death the end of man or only a change? Nachiketa wants an answer to this question. When he says, Nachiketa is not going to be satisfied with anything short of that, he is not boasting. He is only expressing his keenness. So, iti Kathopanishad pratama jaye pratama lali. Here is the first chapter of the first part of the Kathopanishad. So just as in the Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter, really it just sets the scene, and then you get into the actual teaching in the second chapter. In the same way, in the Kathopanishad, this first chapter is set the scene. Nachiketa has gone to Yama, he's asked for his 3 boons, and now he's come to the Vaidloka third boon. And so in chapter 2 then, the actual teaching will begin. So Swami Varadananda, he returns actually tonight, about any time now. He'll probably be reaching about 8:30, he was expected. Then tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock, he gives a talk at the Hindu temple on Chakra. And in the evening, we have Shivanand. And then on Sunday, Swami Varadananda will give a regular Sunday talk on why we should meditate, theory, and practice. Om Asatoma Sadgamya Tamasoma Jyotirgamya Vichurman Amritam Gamya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. And lead us from death to immortality. Oh, peace, peace,